I shamelessly danced with my ex at our anniversary party. He just opened the door and waved goodbye. I considered whether or not I should make this post for a long time, and I'm making it now because I decided that since everything has gone to shit, why not? My life is ruined, and I'm more alone than I've ever been, so I might as well talk about it. Talking about it is all I can do because I don't think there's a chance of me getting out of the hole I've dug myself now. Things went from 0 to 100 so fast it's hard not to think about what the hell even happened. I mean, all of this mess over an anniversary dinner? A simple anniversary dinner, something James, male 34, and I had done 6 times already. It was supposed to be our 7th-year wedding anniversary, and it turned into the worst night of my life. The dinner was a ritual at that point. It was something we did every year, something that all our family members knew about and attended. It could have passed for a dual family holiday even. Everyone came, and the ones that didn't sent apologies about their absence. Our anniversary had taken on a life of its own over the years, and that sounds incredibly nerve-wracking in theory, but I dated James for 3 years, married for 7. I was beyond used to it by then. We always hosted a little dinner the night before, just me, James, and a few friends, and then the next day we had a full-on party, usually at his parents' house. Things between us were good and had been for years. We loved each other, and that, I've learned, is very important when it comes to long-lasting marriages. We had, what I often bragged about up until a few weeks ago, a lovely marriage. Sure, things got a bit rocky sometimes. We fought. We were both pretty stubborn people, so that wasn't surprising. But we always worked things out. We always made sure to handle our issues. Well, all except for one. His mother. James's mother, Tina, was a sore spot for us and had been since before we got married. I'd heard horror stories about mother-in-laws before I got married, before I even met James, and I always assumed that it would never be me, that I would find some way to charm my future mother-in-law, and I would never have to deal with all the awful shit I'd heard about. Unfortunately for me, Tina hated me from the moment that we met. I never really understood it or got to the bottom of why she did, and I guess I never will now. She was the classic Southern sweetheart with everyone but me. Her smiles and oddly specific expressions and compliments she saved for everyone else, but her scowls and scathing comments were reserved especially for me. She'd disguise them behind backhanded compliments or unwanted advice like every mother knew how to do, so of course I looked crazy whenever I pointed out her behavior to James. He couldn't see it and would repeatedly tell me that I was trying to start shit or looking for things that weren't there. 10 years of Tina and I was pretty much used to her. It definitely wasn't easy, but I've learned to just smile and nod the second I stepped foot in her house. She could hardly comment on whatever extra weight I'd gained, a new hairstyle, or the way I did my makeup if I just blended into the background, ate my dinner, and spoke only when spoken to. But I'm only human, and some of her barbs still get to me. The last time I'd seen her, which was at a spa beauty day James had arranged in order for us to bond, she'd taken every opportunity during the 1,000-step routine of her hideous blowout to give me details about James's secretary, who she'd met and was convinced was more of his type. And even though we'd already been together for years, that stung. I tried not to care, but it does hurt to know that the mother of the man you're with will never accept you. James, of course, was always oblivious. Mama's boy that he is, he never even for a second believed that his mother could be anything but perfect. He saw her the way he wanted to see her, as a doting mother and wife who'd done her best to welcome his stiff, sourpuss wife, Tina's words, never as who she actually was, which was a vindictive bitch who would stop at nothing to open her son's eyes and make him realize he can do better. As you can imagine, this caused a lot of fights between us because he always took her side whenever I complained about anything. So eventually, I stopped complaining and just learned to ignore Tina. Our silent rivalry was practically a decade old and exhausting as hell. The only silver lining was our unspoken truce. She could say whatever she wanted whenever I, unfortunately, had to be in her presence, but the anniversary party was off limits. Even someone as evil as had to draw lines in the sand somewhere. The party was the only opportunity I had to be happy in her presence, and I relished that. Which brings me to 3 weeks ago when James told me that the pre-anniversary dinner would not only be happening a week early, but would also happen at his parents' house, with his witch of a mother as our host. Meaning our tradition of having a nice dinner with our friends would now be taken over by her. I fought him on it for as long as I could, but he said that his brother was only in town for that week, before he had to go back to base, and that he and his mom thought it would be nice if he could come to the dinner since he almost always missed the party. I had to accept it after that since I knew how much James missed his older brother. Naively, I thought I could just push through, that it would be like any other dinner with her. It hurt that I'd had to give up dinner with my friends, but I just kept telling myself that it was just for the night and that Tina probably won't be as bad with her other son in attendance. Of course, I was wrong. I just wouldn't realize how wrong until that night. I was late for the dinner, not on purpose despite how tempted I was. I had gotten caught up at work and I called James ahead of time to tell him that I would be a few minutes late, thinking that he would obviously tell him Mom and that they would wait a little bit. I'm not sure what I was expecting to find when I got to the house, but I definitely wasn't expecting the table to already be set, every seat to be occupied, and for them to already be in the process of serving. Another surprising thing was that she had invited Keith, James's longtime best friend, who I'd had a brief relationship with years ago. It was how I even met James. She'd done all she could to make sure I wouldn't have a seat. Obviously, I was confused. I asked what was going on and why dinner was already being served when I'd called to say I would be a few minutes late. Tina explained that James hadn't told her how late I would be, and that she wanted to serve dinner as soon as she could because everyone would already be hungry and they just couldn't sit around waiting for me. When I looked at James, he apologized for his mother and told me I could take his seat. That didn't explain why she had no room for me and why she'd invited her neighbors when I didn't even know them, but I decided to be cordial and not bring it up. Then she asked her husband to eat his dinner in the living room so I could have a seat, and I agreed. I'd thought she'd already done her worst by embarrassing me, but the worst was yet to come. Throughout dinner, my dinner, she went on and on about one of her friends who had been married to his wife for years, but still got a separation, and about how it was never too late to realize that you were with the wrong person. It was all very heavy-handed and rude, but what made it unbearable was when she started spouting nonsense, directly at me, by the way, about how some women just aren't meant to be wives. James stood up and announced that we would not be staying for dessert. He told his mom that he didn't like the wife she treated me with, but my issue was he didn't tell it in front of everyone. He went to her and spoke to her quietly, while she embarrassed me loudly in front of everyone, but I told Tina in front of everyone that she was a pathetic human being. I left with James that night, and even though he didn't say anything in the car, it was obvious that he was upset. He waited until we got to the house to let me know that the way I acted was out of control and that I'd been incredibly rude to his mother and everyone else there. Obviously, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that he would blame me when she was the one who constantly went out of her way to attack me. When I told him this, he all but rolled his eyes and said I couldn't believe that I was bringing that up again, that I was acting crazy and trying to turn him against his mother. It all built up into a huge fight, our worst one. We were yelling at and insulting each other. I let him know that I thought that he was a coward and a weakling who couldn't defend me against his mother. He told me that all I did was mope and be unpleasant, and that he was tired of looking at my sour face and dealing with my depressive moods. That was what did it for me. I grabbed my phone, keys, purse, and left. I got in my car and drove off. For a very brief second, I considered going back to his parents' house just to let out my anger on Tina, but I knew that it would only give her more ammo against me and make me look even crazier. After driving around for a bit, I parked my car somewhere close to our house. I was considering going back in and just ignoring James till he apologized when I got a text. It was Keith. He apologized and said that he had no idea what Tina was planning when she asked him to come. He said that what she did was horrible and then asked if I was okay. I can't even begin to explain what I felt in that moment. To have someone not only acknowledge what she had done, but also apologize for her victimizing me, it was almost euphoric. I called Keith and he immediately picked up. We ended talking about it for some time and I told him that it wasn't her first nor 10th offense. He listened to it all, apologized where necessary. It was the most vindicating thing I'd ever experienced. He was so patient and nice about it too. And because of that, I suddenly remembered how close we used to be and how our relationship had actually been pretty good. I couldn't remember what even happened between us and broke us up in the first place. Eventually, he asked about James, and I told him that we had a big fight and that I left, that I was driving around with nothing to do because I knew that James was too stubborn to apologize so soon, and I didn't want to stay in the house with all his negative, brooding energy, That was when he suggested that I come to his place. That made me pause for a second. I couldn't even remember where he lived. I knew it was close to James's parents' house, but that was about it. I mean, yes, we dated, but we had barely been around each other in 10 years. Keith had been a sweetheart after me, and James got together. He was cordial with me, but he distanced himself and still tried to maintain his friendship with James. It was awkward in those first few years, and back then there were times when I questioned if he was really over me because of how he would act and stare. But so many years had passed since then. I thought that there was no way he could still be harboring anything for me. That thought was what made me say yes. He gave directions to his place, and I drove there. He was still living in the same studio apartment, and the place was still a bit decorated like it was the last time I was there. He invited me in and offered me a drink. I said yes. I didn't think anything of it. It was Keith. We dated forever ago, but he was practically like James's brother now. It wasn't anything serious. It really wasn't. Not at first. He offered me a beer. We talked as we drank. He told me about what he'd been up to the last couple of years. How he'd moved out of town for a bit for work, but moved back after only a few months. How many girlfriends it hadn't worked out with. How that night had been the first time in years that he'd had dinner with Tina. We were having fun and hanging out. The last thing I wanted to do was make it about myself and talk his ear off. But when he asked me if she was always like that, the words spilled out of me faster than I could help it. I asked for something stronger and he made us drinks. Then I launched into my tirade of all Tina's crimes. I made sure to only tell him the funny ones. I didn't want to bring the mood down too bad. We laughed and laughed. I didn't realize it in the moment, but we were laughing so hard because we were drunk. Eventually, the topic of conversation shifted from discussing her crimes to shitting on her. It was mean and petty, but if I'm being honest, she deserved it. He made drink after drink, and we were having so much fun talking shit and laughing Tina that I barely even noticed that it had gotten so late. If James could have seen us, getting drunk and bad-mouthing his precious mother, his heart would have stopped in his chest. But he wasn't there. He wasn't there because he had called me crazy instead of listening to me. With Keith, for the first time ever, I felt seen and understood in my decade-long struggle. He didn't dismiss me or tell me that I was an instigator just looking to stir up trouble. It's no excuse. I know that it's no excuse. But you guys have to understand in some way. I spent years dulling myself down and taking all of Tina's spite just for her to hijack my dinner and my husband. I was upset and I was angry. Maybe I truly did feel something with Keith at that moment. Or maybe I wanted to hit James where I knew it would hurt even though he wouldn't know. I'm not sure. I kissed Keith, but in my defense, I was fully expecting him to push me away. Like I said, I was so sure that he was over me, that he had no more feelings for me. He didn't push me away, though. He kissed me back. 1 second I was leaning in to practically peck him on the lips, and the next, his hands were all over me. He kissed me like he had been waiting years to do it, like he was starving for it. His hands moved all over my body. I felt him everywhere, and even though I knew it was wrong, I didn't want it to stop. We pulled back for a second, and both of us were panting like crazy. There was a moment, I can't really remember because I was pretty drunk, but I'm sure I saw it, where we both shared a look like we knew what we were doing was wrong, just for a moment before we were back to kissing and grabbing at each other. Things didn't end there. I wish I could say that they did, but they didn't. We kissed for a while, and eventually things got handsy, just feeling each other up a bit and a little hand stuff. Nothing serious. We never got fully undressed, and we didn't have sex. It was all just a bit of fooling around. I pushed him away eventually, though, and then I mumbled something about it being too late and how I had to get home. I rushed out of his place and got to my car. I was still pretty tipsy and wobbly, so I definitely shouldn't have been driving. But what could I have done? Call James to give me a ride from Keith's place? Let Keith, who I just cheated on my husband with, drive me back home to him? I had no choice but to drive as slowly and carefully as I could back to my house. By the time I got back, James had gone to bed. All the lights were off, and the dishes in the sink were already washed. I remember feeling irritated that he hadn't waited up or called me until I answered to find out where I had gone, but I knew that I didn't have a leg to stand on. I decided at that moment to not say a word about what had happened. I thought that there was no point confessing to something that was so meaningless. Our 7th-year anniversary was literally a week away. Why should I ruin it by telling James that I shared a kiss with Keith when it didn't mean anything? Why ruin our lives, our marriage, because of some silly mistake? The week leading up to the party was absolutely nerve-wracking. I was consumed with anxiety and worried that Keith would end up saying something to James. But 3 days after that night passed, and I hadn't heard a word from Keith. And I knew that he hadn't said anything to James because James had apologized and was nothing but compassionate and romantic during that week. Everything was going so well, so perfect. I thought that it was all going to be fine. But then a night before the party, I got a text from Keith, a solitary hey. I waited and waited. Those little speech bubble things kept popping up and disappearing. I waited to see what he wanted to say, if maybe the guilt was getting to him and he was going to tell me that he would confess or something, but nothing popped up. Eventually, I just had to give up and leave it alone. In the end, I thought that maybe he was just nervous and wanted to reach out, but decided not to. So I threw myself into last-minute prep for the party and made sure that everything went smoothly the next day. The party, like always, was a success. Our families were all around celebrating with us, and everything went how it should. We went to a cute dinner place that also had a garden, and it was decorated with fairy lights. The only thing was that James was a bit off. He was never the crazy, affectionate type, probably a result of Tina's no doubt awful upbringing. But I couldn't help but notice his weirdness because of how affectionate and sweet he'd been the week before. He was still sweet at the party, but he almost seemed kind of robotic. Of course, I wouldn't realize the reason why until hours later. I just brushed it off and assumed it was nothing crazy. Tina, thankfully, kept to herself that night and didn't bother me, which meant that I was free to move around and speak to people without her making some snide remark or two. It was while I was mingling that I noticed Keith walk in late. He immediately came straight to me and asked if things were still good between us. That confused me, but I needed to make sure he wasn't feeling too anxious, so he wouldn't become too loose-lipped around James, so I asked him if he wanted to dance. He agreed, and we made our way to the dance floor, which was really just the center of the living room. We danced for a while, and I'm not even sure why, but we ended up pretty close. I knew that our family wouldn't think anything of it since Keith was practically family too, so we danced however we wanted. There was almost no space between us as we moved to the music. Eventually we pulled away, though, and my face was hot as I looked around the room. No one was even paying attention. No one thought anything of it, except for James. He watched us pull away with this look on his face, like he was angry. He glared at me for a few seconds and then walked away, like he knew that I would follow him. Obviously I did, and I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't even say anything. The look on his face was like he was disgusted just looking at me. I asked him again what was wrong, but he didn't answer. Instead, he just walked over to the door and pulled it open. I walked through it thinking that he wanted us to go outside and hash out whatever was wrong, away from all our family. What I didn't expect was for him to give me a small wave goodbye and then slam the door in my face. I immediately tried to open it up again, but he had locked it. I knocked on the door to get him to open it, but he didn't answer. After like a minute of calling out to him and banging on the door, he told me, through the door, to leave. That was it. Nothing else. Just that I should leave. I had nothing else to do. I'd been banging on the door, and no one had come to open it. They obviously couldn't hear me over the music, and if Tina had heard me, she would probably turn the volume up. I had no choice but to go back home. I waited for James to come back home for as long as I could, but I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, he was waiting by the foot of the bed, still dressed in his suit from the night before. When he saw that I was awake, he didn't say anything. He just handed me his phone. On it was a screenshot of some messages from Keith. It took me a minute, I was still groggy, to notice that it was my own chat with Keith. It started after he sent that hey. I'd left my phone on the counter, and when I came back, I didn't see any new messages, but apparently they had come in. James must have seen them, responded to them, and then deleted the whole thing. After the hey text, Keith asked if things were still good between us after that night, and James had responded in a way that made Keith reveal more information that made us both look incredibly guilty. Of course, he couldn't have known that he was giving things away. He thought he was texting me when really he was texting James. James finally spoke up and told me that he didn't believe it at first. He wanted to believe that after 10 years together, I wouldn't betray him like that, with Keith of all people. But then, after he saw the way we whispered to each other and danced together at the party, he knew that something had happened. I didn't even know where to start from, but I knew I needed to say something. But before I could try to explain myself, he told me that he didn't want to hear it. That he was leaving and would be staying with his parents until he decided what to do about us. I watched him go. There wasn't much else I could do. There really wasn't any way that I could spin things. I had betrayed him. It's been a week since then, and I haven't heard anything from him. I've been too scared to say the quiet part out loud, that we might be getting a divorce, but I think that might be where we're headed. I refuse to accept that it's all just over because of that, though. 10 years together can't just end over something so insignificant. But I don't know what to do or how to get James to see that we need to work things out. I don't know how to fix things between us.